Oh wait, Felix did say he can't make it today.
All right. I think we'll go ahead and dive in, though we're missing a couple of folks who are here but not in the room. So I'll call this work session to order. Today is Friday, May 2nd, 2025. We're on the record from 2:10 to 3:10 right now. It is 2:11. And we're here to have a discussion about our Assembly Housing Action Plan as well as our Assembly Work Plan. This item, I have myself at the top of it, but I'm not going to talk that long. I think that Ms. Brawley and Mr. Rivera are really well positioned to talk about the Housing Action Plan and other details. So I will say that the Assembly really only started in earnest to have a work plan about in the pandemic when things were darkest. We just figured the public needed a roadmap for how we were going to spend our time and effort and a way to measure our performance if we actually delivered on what we said we were going to do, because it's easy enough to get up here and pontificate that you have done the thing, but it's really, really beneficial to the community to say, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we did trying to do it, and next year, this is how we're going to fix it. And so if you look at the progress report, essentially here, it includes a number of priorities. It also includes a number of accomplishments. In 2024, we identified our highest priorities as housing and homelessness, economic development, infrastructure and transportation, public health, safety, and quality of life, and Assembly's internal business and quality municipal services. In some ways, if you look at our committee structures, they follow along in these areas so that there are places to do this work. But then under each of those headers, you will see projects that are listed. Now, it's not safe to assume that all of those are Assembly projects per se, although anything that is passed and adopted is an Assembly project by nature of the approval. But instead, these are all the areas that members are working on and put forward as priorities. And so in June at our Rules Committee meeting, we will do a more deep dive onto the specific items. And this will be really the first opportunity for the new members of the body to provide input on the plan per se and the details, and really to add your name to any of the items, or to add items, or to kind of start to shape the debate about what the priorities should be that we work on as a body, because these things affect how the staff of the branch kind of conduct the work of the branch. It helps to give guidance about where the resources are fairly applied or kind of assumed to be applied, so that you can have some bandwidth of the limited resources that we do have. And so I think that's the initial picture of the Assembly's annual work plan. And so that's really all I have for the beginning. If there's any questions on that.
Not a question, but should we do introductions just for the record?
Yeah, I guess we should. Mr. Johnson.
Zach Johnson.
Yarrow Silvers.
Keith McCormick.
Jared Kirker.
Aaron Baldwin Day.
Daniel Boland.
Anna Brawley.
Christopher Constant on the phone. Mr. Myers.
Yes, thanks, Chair.
Also have members clerk's office, legislative services, and Assembly legal. So, okay, I am now because go ahead, Claire.
I just wanted to add one thing to that. I realized that the electronic document and the one I passed out are a little bit different. So this progress report is what we put out in February. The Assembly adopts it and it's for the public view. But then what you see on the screen is a uglier but very useful Word document. And that's what we use throughout the year to actually make this a living document and update it. And so there on that Word document, we've added the municipal departments that fit with that action area. And then we have the Assembly member who signed up to lead it, any action. I update this quarterly and share it, and members give me feedback. And so we add actions that have happened, status, and then this year, Chair Constant worked with administration to get them to write which ones that their priorities are. And so this is in the electronic documents posted with this work session, and I'll make sure it gets posted on the Assembly's website so it can be readily available. That one will be a little more useful for you to look through as you're preparing for the June Rules Committee when you take on more detailed updates of this, and then assign new members to projects.
Right. So yeah, I don't have that one in front of me. We'll get into that one a little bit. It is a very handy document. It is more current than the kind of shiny, happy, polished version that gets printed, but this is where rubber meets the road in the context of who's working on what in the bigger picture. I mean, there's any number of specific projects any member might be working on. The attorneys keep a separate list from all of these things that are their privileged files of who's doing what with whom. But otherwise, this is really the guide. So it's a very handy tool. And it's fairly new. Again, accountability is a value that we've all generally agreed to share. So with that, I'll hand it over to Anna. And I don't think Mr. Ritter will be able to be here, but this is kind of a long dive into the Assembly Housing Action Plan. Anna.
Yeah, thank you. And I know some of you have been tracking housing stuff for a while, so some of this may look familiar, but we thought it'd be useful to step back, not just talk about kind of where the housing action plan came from, but also because really we have tracked our progress with this plan, but we have not updated it. So this is also a great opportunity to open it back up. And I think, as I'll get into in a second, this plan was created in an environment where there was less collaboration and there was less kind of proactive work on this topic from the executive branch side. So I'll just say that because a lot of housing work would typically come from the planning department or come from, another space. And so it is somewhat unusual for the assembly to have generated a plan like this in terms of kind of who typically does housing policy. But I think, again, because it's policy and there was a lot of interest in this and a lot of really energy and positive focus on housing, that this was the space that we occupied with the idea that this is things we can work on, not that it's the whole universe of things that need to happen with housing. So just a brief kind of look back, where did this come from? Really, it was actually well before I and others who came on in 2023 even were on this body. Housing has been a priority for the Assembly for several years. So I can't speak to a lot of the specifics, but I know there was a retreat in fall 2022 to talk to, figure out housing. There was a fair amount of housing legislation done by Assembly members in zoning, but also other policies. And there was a lot of really investment with public funds in housing. So there was the kind of COVID relief money. There was a number of investments in housing, affordable housing, getting housing online. And so that was a focus, as well as looking at things like incentives. So this is not a new thing or not something that started in 2023, but in 2023 we had a lot of great really momentum and focus. So there was a retreat in May 2023 organized by the Assembly. We were all there. It was shortly after we all got sworn in, obviously with all 12 members there, and talked a lot about what we could focus on. So we got really great expert reports from Mr. Clauda, who's now in the mayor's office, from folks from planning, and developers, really getting a lay of the land in terms of what our housing issues are. Housing is not just one issue; it's really a whole mix of different problems to solve or different levers to pull, however you want to look at it. And there's public sector role and private sector role. So really, just trying to get our handle on what is our housing issue, and I think a lot of people had some idea of some of the issues, but it wasn't really defined in a clear way. And so that was really the work during that retreat and the work before that as well, to focus on some targeted things. So from that, we decided to hold a convening in the fall. So the retreat was open to the public, but it was really focused on Assembly and folks who attended there. So we talked about having another convening about housing, knowing it was a big priority, but not just saying, let's have another meeting, wanting to have a product that came out of that. And so the housing, we called it the strategic plan originally. The housing action plan really grew out of that entire several months of process. And alongside the actual plan, we had Housing Action Week. So we really activated folks, not just within the city, and Legislative Services did a great idea organizing a lot of events. That's where our first City Nerd Night came from. We had a number of kind of community events that happened. The home builders happened to have a conference the same week, so they hosted. So it was really just a great week to kind of highlight housing in a number of different ways. And again, focused on what we can do locally, knowing there's a lot of issues outside of that. So So from that, we brought a draft of our plan. We had multiple work sessions and kind of, iterations of working through that. This plan was not created in a vacuum. It looked back to our comprehensive plans, prior assembly work. There were assembly priorities established, right? Kind of looking at all of this body of work to say, how do we pull this together into a coherent, short document that we can use, similar to the work plan, but really diving into housing. So in fall 2023, we talked through it, we shared it with the community, we got a lot of feedback, and then we adopted this plan formally in December of 2023. So the Housing Action Plan itself is really a 6-page document. This isn't that specific document, but it's got our vision, our goals, our guiding principles, and then it outlined a number of strategies. So if you look at page 2, this is the short version. Really, how are we going to do that? So how are we going to get more housing? For example, removing barriers to infill and new constructions and encouraging reuse and redevelopment, incentives, expanding a housing affordability. So really looking at kind of the different lanes that we can work in as assembly members, working with departments, with others in the community. And then you'll see also this assembly toolbox. So really, again, trying to drill down to, we can't make the feds change interest rates, right? But what we can do is we can pass local policy. We can make investments. So really trying to, again, keep things in our lane. So from that, a number of kind of specific actions were identified in the plan. And similar to the work plan, it's a menu. So it doesn't mean that we were working on all these things at once. But these were really ideas that everybody brought to the table to say, these are things that we have reasonable expectation will help move that housing needle. The other piece of this plan, I don't know if it's in this document, not specifically, but we had metrics in the plan. So that's been a whole project on its own. I'll come back to the metrics piece. Oh, it is page 3. Okay. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. So if you look at page 3, measures for success. And that was really trying to say, how do we measure what we're doing? And so I'll again say, this was 2023. So before the 10,000 homes plan, because that is a metric, right? That is a metric we can measure, how many homes. But we were really looking at how we track the types of new housing that's being built, how many housing units are being renovated, rental market vacancy rate, not because we ourselves can change that vacancy rate, but because it's a good indicator of the health of the market for rental housing. Anyway, so there's a number of metrics here. And then I know the staff for the last year or so have been really trying to track down how we measure those. How do we get our baseline data and making sure that it's things we can track. So that's been a work in progress as well. And it's all really highlighted, I think, a lot of ways where we need to be tracking more. So, and that conversation, of course, is also relevant for the 10,000 homes. So I won't go into all of the detail here, but just to share, that's where this came from. And so, so in here, you'll see a really detailed kind of list of progress. You see leads. So again, similar to the work plan, members who have said in the past they want to lead on this. You'll see there are members who are no longer on this body, so you could pick up the work there if you would like, or if there's something that hasn't been picked up yet. Whether or not there's something on this list here, there certainly are folks working on it, whether it's the planning department, mayor's office. There's a lot of folks now working on these issues. So I would guess that more of these things are moving than what it looks like on this page. But we did accomplish a fair amount. If you look through here, I guess this is from last year. So I'm going to look at, yeah, okay. So I'm going to turn ahead to the 2024 progress report. So that's more updated. And that's really a more public facing document, but that's maybe the best way to describe work that we've already accomplished. So it's got a number of ordinances, it's got the strategies related to those pieces, and it has a brief description of those. So really a way to look at what we're doing. This is heavy on zoning and kind of those code changes, a little bit light on looking at affordability and kind of the stuff other than producing housing, the way I would put it. So there's certainly a lot of room to work on this. So that's really where this plan came from. The priorities, again, are really aligned with these goals and the strategies. There's a number of actions underneath them, and folks are working on them in various degrees. And so then that brings me to, and then we can have some discussion. Now we have the mayor's 10,000 homes plan strategy. So we've been talking for a while. I've talked a number of times with the mayor's office, how do we make these two plans talk to each other? Do we want to combine them? Do we want to merge the plans, whatever that looks like? So at this point, the mayor's strategy is moving forward. There was a decision not to put these together, but I think then it raises the question, what do we want to do with this going forward? So I would say, I don't think we want to get rid of it. There's certainly a lot of work to do, but we're in a different posture now, and we have new members, and just, we've made a lot of progress. So I think it's a good inflection point to stop and say, where should we go from here? And so the question that I'll put to folks generally is to think about, how do we make sure that these plans are aligned or cross-referenced, or making sure that they can work alongside each other without duplicating, but also keeping us, again, in our lane? So that's really an open question. I don't have a specific proposal for that, but that's kind of the next step, doing something with this besides the individual work that's in it.
Mr. Wall.
Thanks. One idea that I have, if it's possible, I think we'd have to think about this, but the Assembly has given some policy guidance to update our plans, the 2020 comp plan, and I think the residential portion of the 2040 land use plan. And so I'm wondering if some of this could be an amendment to the 2040 land use plan. And because we have goals, we have our guiding principles, we have our measures of success. I feel like that could all be an adopted element, at least of the 2040 land use plan, in the same way that some of our neighborhood plans or other district plans are. Even like the specific actions, I think, would be potentially worth including. Perhaps not, which assembly members are going to be, because I'm just thinking more like long-term down the road, lasting beyond just one mayoral administration or one assembly body. What's the long-term vision? Yeah, so that could be an idea.
Anyone else? So I think I will add then to that kind of thought that I think any addition to the 2040 plan should be carefully crafted, either to be the governing body's voice, or if it's the public voice, then it goes out for a significant public review. It's like one of those two has to be kind of framed. It could be either one just is a different process with a different label, right, and a different gravity, if you will. Then these are our priorities as a body over the next 5 years, 10 years, whatever it might be,
Do we have like a master sheet of all the folks who contributed to the assembly action plan or comments?
We have a couple of different things. We have a list of all the people who attended the different housing action events. You did put this out for public comment, and we got a handful of public comments that are saved somewhere. I think members Brawley and Rivera looked through all those public comments and used it to make edits, and so we didn't. I don't know how relevant they'll be at this point. And then it was the members who worked on it.
Yeah, so I think from my perspective, it has been some public process already done to create this plan, but maybe there's room for expansion as it moves forward, and if it does become an adopted element of other broader plans.
Yeah, I think if you're intending to make it an amendment to the comprehensive plan, there is a process for that, separate from anything that went into generating this. And so it's just something to think about. And it doesn't mean it needs to take 2 years and 40 meetings and all of that. It just has to follow a general rubric of public outreach that meets the standard of what would be adopted in a plan.
On a separate but related note, I think I'd be really interested in doing the work that Anna mentioned, to cross-reference what we have here with what's already in the mayor's 10,000 homes plan, and potentially even doing some work alongside members of the administration, potentially Mr. Downey and others, to think about sort of prioritizing or sequencing some of these actions that maybe haven't been started yet or that don't have an owner yet, to make this even a little tighter and to give us maybe a shared roadmap for how we'd like to get some of this work done. So that's something I'd personally be interested in helping to do.
So your question I have then is, we have the Housing and Homelessness Committee, but it tends to almost universally talk about homelessness. And then we have the CEDC group, which talks at times about land use. Is there some working group that I am not recalling right now that is focusing on housing, that is both the administration and the legislative branch?
Yeah, I don't know that there's one formed. I think that's something we could form, like an ad hoc kind of group to work through this, but there isn't a standing one besides individual projects.
So I think that, Aaron, you just kind of highlighted an opportunity. And so I think that maybe between you and myself, we'll reach out to Graham and the mayor and seek their input on the value of that and the founding of it. Would be a good invitation to make. Maybe somebody will keep that note so we don't forget.
I've got it in my notes.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. And so just to say as well, we want to put this on the table to figure out what our next steps are. We don't have to figure all that out today. Another question that I would put, well, and I should say too, we know that the mayor's office, when they were writing the 10,000 homes plan, did take a close look at ours. And this document does note where those cross references are. So it doesn't mean that it's been worked out who's doing it or any of that, but at least there's some looking back. And they did utilize a lot of our work in the way that they crafted their work, some of which, like changing the permitting process, that's in our plan, but we always knew that's not something that we go in and do, right? That's a staff function, but it needs to be done. So anyway, so there's a lot of room there, and I think there's a lot of interest in collaborating. We just haven't made the space to do that. The other question I would ask folks too, just more generally to step back from this process, are there things on here that are particularly exciting to you, whether it's a specific action or one of these strategies? It's like, as you're thinking about the work that you want to do, what are you excited about? Are there things that you want to highlight there? And again, not maybe I want to work on this specific ordinance, but are there areas that you feel like you want to dive into? I think that's helpful to know.
Anyone else? Other thoughts?
I think just a follow-up question to that, what would be the best way to communicate that interest?
I think that maybe we need to rely on legislative services for a brokering that, or in the context of looking at the housing action plan and what areas and what specific elements are in the wheelhouse you'd like to work on. I think the best way to do that is through legislative services to avoid open meetings issues. And then we'll get a table that kind of follows this, that gets closer to like a work plan or a roadmap of specifics updated from where we are. So that's what I think, legislative service. Yeah. And I see heads nodding on that side of the table. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I think one more thing to put on the table, again, not to belabor this today, but so the one piece to think about is, what do we do with this plan going forward? And I think that's an idea to put it in the comp plan. We certainly want to update it. We want to talk to the administration about what they're working on, where we can collaborate. And then the other piece, just to put on the table, at least from my perspective, I feel like we focused a lot out of necessity and interest on zoning changes, housing production, right? The kind of code, the physical building piece of it. But we also know housing affordability is a huge issue. Some of that came up in the discussion about property tax burdens, for example. We know there's a lot of substandard housing. We know there's vacant and abandoned properties. And some of that is tied to new units, but there's also these other issues related to residents' quality of life and ability to afford to live here. There's also kind of related conversations to have about energy efficiency. How could reducing your utility bills help reduce your housing cost? So I just wanted to also put that on the table specifically because I think that has not gotten as much attention, not for lack of interest, but just there hasn't really been as clear of a what codes do we change? What incentives do we put in place? But that's something to think about if you're interested in housing and wanting to look for a space that isn't zoning. Because Mr. Rivera, I know, has said, he's like, I don't do land use, I'll do the other stuff. So if there's the other stuff that you want to work on, some of that is in this plan, maybe not enough is in this plan, but that's something to think about as well.
Daniel?
Who's working on the pre-approved plans? Because I know Meg was on that, and I know Claire, you've done a lot of work on that stuff.
It's an orphan. It has lost both of its assembly parents, but I'm still continuing to work on it since it was in process. I'm working on contracts with a couple of architects to submit drawings of ADUs that will then go through permitting and be pre-approved. And then I'm working in collaboration with a couple of departments to create an ADU webpage within building services website. So if anyone wants to adopt that little orphan
I'd be
baby.
happy to be on
Okay.
that one. Yeah.
Aaron, are you? Oh, okay.
So
I
that
mean,
one
I
is
would be excited about
one
that too.
that feels, that one is one that feels like it's maybe getting out of our lane a little bit. If we're building web pages for the administration, for people to make applications for, that starts to sound kind of squarely in the hands of the executive. And so I think part of that question should be like, where are we in the context of that project? What is the legislative function that needs to be addressed? And then who owns it on the administrative side, and how do we support them, right? Because we, I think, have to be very careful not to be building websites for the planning department, except for making sure it's compliant with our vision, getting that work kind of packaged properly for them. So
While we're on that topic and we have time, I'll just explain. It was a little bit of an odd one. It was one that assembly members, this goes all the way back to Kevin Cross, really wanted. And people at the Tudor Elmore building were not opposed to it, but just didn't have the capacity. And so the assembly funded it and funded hiring a consultant to help with it. And it was just too big and we didn't get any bids. So then I just became the assaultant. Sometimes I do that too, my way or the highway. The consultant, and I kind of bridged between the assembly members and all of the different staff. And I think it went really well. We had, our first step was we reached out to them and they assigned Daniel King to be my counterpart. So he and I were partners on the project. And then it was staff that don't usually get together in a room. And so it was nice to be the convener. And then I am not creating a website. They're loaning it to us temporarily to build it out. And then we're giving it back to development services to maintain in the future.
go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, so I think, so where I see the legislative role with that is, number one, if there is more funding that needs to come forward to effectuate it. Number two, if there's follow-up code changes or tweaks that need to be made to allow for it. And then number three, I do think that some of the best successes that we've had with a lot of our progress support stuff that we worked on is when we are all in the same room and we have that working group model. We did that on the triplex, fourplex. We took months at a time, and Allie was at all the meetings and council was at all the meetings. And I think Claire, you were at quite a few of them, as well as planning department, building officials, fire inspectors, traffic engineer, all the different departments. And I think when it's, I can see a role for the assembly where, we put forward policy guidance, or we're working on a legislative change to be the convener in some of those instances. So yeah, if that's an element of the ADU pre-approved plans, I think that's worthwhile.
And I guess it really all depends on at what level it is ready and ripe for implementation, because we are not the implementers, nor shall we ever be. And so that's just not our house. But it's, obviously in this work, I probably was the first one in this body to start that effort in the Berkowitz administration, and they just shut it down. They said, we're not doing it. And so it has been an ongoing concern to get some pre-approved tools available to streamline that process. And I'm glad we're getting close. Other items in the housing space? No? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll just briefly wrap up. So first, take a look at this plan, including the project progress report, so you can see what's been done. That is not at all the full list of things that should be done or could be done, or that we haven't even dreamed up yet. So that's one ask. We will work on next steps, getting that conversation. I think it would be helpful to have work with the administration and just kind of talk through priorities. Take a look at the 10,000 homes plan because they are moving forward to implement that. And we can be involved in various ways, especially on things like ordinances. And then, yeah, talk to legislative services, especially if you see a project on here that doesn't have an owner anymore, or maybe does, but just to avoid OMA. There's a number of things in the works that may not be public yet. And I know the administration is also working through several things. So I would definitely talk to Nolan Clouda, talk to Graham Downey. I know he's in a different role right now, so he's not as focused on housing per se. And then also go and talk to the planning department and the building department, because they are also working through a building code update. Planning has a number of ordinances. And again, there's things that have not come out yet, but are in the works. So you can jump on them and be a co-sponsor potentially. So I would just start chasing down if there's stuff you're interested in. And then, of course, you can also talk to our builder friends. They have a lot to say. And so I'm sure they've already been reaching out. So there's definitely more things to consider as well. So I think that's the housing work for now.
And I would just add a little caveat to what you said. It's not to avoid OMA, it's to avoid violations of OMA. So to be really clear and specific. That's the purpose. Nolan, you're walking in at the last minute, but it's still within the last minute. And so if you want to come forward, we are talking about housing policy. And there was actually an interesting proposal that was just raised, and now would be probably a good time to pitch it to you. Aaron, you want to take the floor?
Hi, Mr. Clouda. How are you? We were just chatting about potentially doing some coordination work, convening a work group or something among the assembly and members of the mayor's administration, specifically on housing issues. We have a couple of committee locations where housing issues can be raised, but not necessarily one focused space. And when there isn't really any kind of like connective tissue right now to coordinate housing policy work among ourselves and the administration. And so we're chatting about that possibility of putting some kind of a work group together and would love your feedback on that idea.
Add a slight caveat in there that we have our housing action plan and the administration has their housing proposal, your housing work that you're doing. And the vision is to figure out where they coordinate and how we can, I think to use your term, generate a shared roadmap to success.
Mm-hmm.
And there isn't a place where those conversations are kind of formalized or maybe more structured. And so really the question is along those lines of, is there interest? And you don't have to answer off the top of your head because I never like pop-up questions, but in creating some kind of a small assembly working group on housing that can be kind of a cabinet level conversation tool for you.
Yeah, through the chair to Member Baldwin Day. That's absolutely something we would like to see, I think, and to be able to create that space for collaboration and more dialogue. I mean, which the dialogue happens, but in a more one-off way or kind of disparate way. And I think that something like that would make a lot of sense, an alignment of our strategies around housing. And there is a tremendous amount of agreement about what's in the house what's in the housing action plan, what's in the 10,000 home strategy. I think they do speak to each other really well and point in the same direction. I think that there's more alignment, that we can and should do. And I think that we would be very interested in talking about some kind of a collaboration like that.
Great news. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And I know this is the conversation we've had for a long time now. We are talking about how and really what we do with our housing action plan going forward. And so we talked about that these are two parallel documents. So that's something we're also going to be figuring out is kind of as we make updates to this plan, how can we also make sure that it is on paper speaking to the mayor's strategy or to the point about what we've chosen as priorities or sequencing. So that's also part of the conversation we can continue. Thanks.
And a note of caution to newer members. So from time to time, a working group, either formal or informal forms of the assembly to work with the administration. And I think the biggest one that comes to mind was some years ago, and it was in relationship to finding locations for shelter services, like where are we going to put shelters? And the assembly effectively relied on 3 members to sit in a room and hammer things out with the administration. The caution I'm trying to point out here now to everybody is that no small group speaks for the assembly, but can have the kind of blessing of the assembly to do that work informally. The key to success in those dynamics is frequent checkbacks with the body at various points in time, so that you don't get so far ahead of your peers that you find yourself standing on an island alone when you're trying to move something forward. And so there is some caution in that space to bring everyone along at regular intervals as you do that work, so that your work is productive. And anyhow, that's my one caution on those things, and they're valid and valuable, and bring us with you.
And what is the most effective mechanism for doing those sorts of updates that does not put us in violation of OMA?
Right. So now there's an even more subtle piece. If Dean were here, he would be admonishing me. If we create a subcommittee of even 3 members, then it is subject to open meetings. And so we won't be doing that in most cases. It will have to be informal. And so there's like a subtle threaded line in there, right? And so the Rules Committee is a very good place to bring it up in ongoing legislation work. There's almost always time when we go around round robin. I'm working on this and I want to tell you about it. Or there could be a committee of note where that subject matter is germane and you bring it up there, but oftentimes the committees have a subset small enough that it might not actually achieve the goal. And so I think the question is dependent upon the subject and what you're trying to do. So you'll be creative and you'll figure out all those tools real quick. Yara.
Why not just make it an open, publicly noticed committee?
So there are reasons to do that and there are reasons not to. And the administration is not subject to the same rules that we are. And for the purposes of having informal conversations to build strategies, there are reasons to start just working it out in private. So that would be why, and it can be both, but I would hesitate to do that. Otherwise, we'll just have another committee. And we have a housing committee, we have the rules committee, we have those committees where that work can be done. My mission has been to reduce the number of committees and connect to the administration in all of those places as possible, because many of us will find that there are just too many meetings. Was that Aaron? Did you have a question? No, was that you? Daniel, okay.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say 2 things. Speaking of like that working group model too, I think it's helpful to have, sometimes you just want like trusted voices in the room while you're drafting a product and it's not ready to go live or be public. And so you get the opportunity to hear expertise from different municipal departments or members of the public who have or are maybe subject matter experts, and then to put all those ingredients into your recipe, and then finally you get to bring it forward. And what we did when we did the special ad hoc committee, the special committee meeting on the sales tax proposal, we did publicly notice that. So there's times where, I think both are a strength. I think the one other thing that I will say to all of this that we're talking about, we have these plans and these projects that we want to work on, right? And it's good to have a roadmap. It's good to have, where we can have it, alignment with the administration. I don't think we're always going to have it on every different topic. But I guess one thing I want, flip side of the coin to impress upon, particularly our newer members, is that as an elected policymaker, you also have the prerogative to bring forward your own projects, your own policies. Ideally, I think you'll want to be strategic about doing that in the most effective way and getting the most buy-in, because it'll be more likely to move ahead, whether that's with the support of your peers or actually the ones who have to implement or enforce those things, the administration. But don't think that just because something's not called out on here that you can't have your own idea and bring something forward. Thanks.
I think that this just helps, these plans help the staff that support us to understand where they can more generously apply the limited resources that we have, right? And so this whole process is about finding the resources to achieve your goals. And it's a bit of the Hunger Games in the context of us not having enough bodies to do the work and trying to figure it out. And so in as much as possible, if you're working within the plans, you'll find much more opportunity for success. I mean, it's a little bit hard. All I can say is may the odds be ever in your favor. So collaboration is the key to success for avoiding all of that as much as possible. And sometimes the fight is the fight, you got to have it. But, and that's not the goal. The goal is to figure out where your assets lie to be successful, or lay to be successful. Okay, others? So I think we'll probably have a lot of meetings that might feel like we're just talking about stuff and kind of getting the ground. But if, in a backcountry perspective, this is like your wheels starting to dig into the mud and your four-wheelers are trying to push forward. It starts slow, starts a little hard. And then once you get the momentum going, it gets moving. And so we're in that space quite a bit, going over plans, going over working arrangements. So Nolan, did you have anything you want to add in the context of the housing policy work before we pivot onto the alcohol tax?
Mr. Chair, I do apologize that I missed most of the meeting, but this is something this is a real bright spot, I think, with the housing work that the Assembly has been taking on since before we started as an administration, and then what we can do together now. And I think there's a real great opportunity to keep the momentum going, and we really want to do that. And I think that there's tremendous alignment. I think that we're seeing really good results so far with housing work. I think we're also working hard. We're getting a lot of really high praise in the permit department these days, or in the permit center these days, which is a newer, kind of in some ways, kind of a newer thing, hearing from home builders about good problem solving, good customer service, kind of working on solutions, solving things for pattern rather than one-off cases. So this is something we're really pleased with, and I think it's something that we want to continue working closely with the Assembly and finding lots of alignment that I believe is already there.
So the last thing on the agenda is just a quick demonstration of the alcohol tax guidance that we have here. And it's this kind of green and yellowish 4-pager. And I'm going to step back from the alcohol tax conversation briefly. And I was having an email conversation with Claire about this. So we as an assembly provide guidance to the administration on any number of topics and in a number of ways, mainly by resolution or ordinance if it's the law we wish to affirm. And so the specific documents like this is our adopted guidance for the alcohol tax. These are the areas that we have said we want to see these priorities funded. If you think about it in the context of, say, collective bargaining and relationships with our labor units, we can provide guidance by resolution and do provide guidance to the administration on the negotiations before they happen. And we can do that generally to all labor bargaining units, or we can do it specifically to each one as they come up with the priorities we want to see. We cannot tell them to offer X, Y, and Z, except with some very specific circumstances if we create benefits, but we can say these are the terms that we will require in order for us to get to yes on approving this agreement you're working on. So it is an area of opportunity for the Assembly to be very clear on what we think are the priorities the administration should pick up. And so this guidance here on the alcohol tax was collectively developed between the administration and the Assembly, so it has a much higher chance of not creating conflict, but it is an expression of the will of the Assembly on the areas we want to see funded through the alcohol sales tax. And so I think that generally speaking, the purpose of having this before you is so that you can take an opportunity when you have a few minutes and your mental bandwidth is clear enough to read it and it makes sense, that you see where the Assembly has put forward our guidance for last year and this year in thinking about how we're going to proceed in the conversation moving forward. I think that how much is the alcohol tax? About $15 million annually, mostly programmed at this point. And yeah, we'll see when the audits come back and we finally have the final close books. But for the most part, it's generally all appropriated. And so the theory, though, is we could change those priorities. We can insert that we need to add or kind of shift The challenge, of course, being then we might have to reduce from another area or find alternative resources. And so the purpose of this document is to help you understand the framework of which we approach using the alcohol tax to fund services in the municipality as required by the charter. The guidance isn't, but the money is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I'll just highlight two things. If you look at number 3, this was recommendations that have already happened. One is that are kind of more in our lane. One was number 2, develop and implement an annual communication plan. So that's something that we have been doing for the last couple of years. This Cheers Anchorage and the other kind of materials that you might have seen around is really getting that information out to the public. Because one of the biggest things we heard was people generally support the tax, not everybody, but a number of people support the tax, but they want to know where it goes and they may not know. So a lot of that work is really, again, transparency, helping people understand and really deconstruct the budget documents that are hard to read and make it into a more kind of what impacts are we seeing. So that's one piece of it that will continue. It sounds like the goal is to hand that off to the administration as one of their jobs so that we're not doing that communications indefinitely, but that is one priority. Another one is number 10, developing a required annual reporting process on where those funds are spent. Again, for transparency, for communication with the public. That is what you saw on the agenda 2 weeks ago or last week, whenever that was. And again, really with the goal of translating the information that's there, but no one can read, essentially into things that people can use. And so that's just 2 things that have been implemented, again, with the goal of making sure people know how we're spending our money, especially with this particular tax. And so I just want to call those out, that is an ongoing project to make sure people have that information and they can read it.
Anything else, Aaron?
I'm just curious how this document was developed.
You want to speak to that, Claire?
Yeah, so I feel like I might have talked about this at some point, so I don't want to repeat too much, but the assembly funded the creation of a strategic plan. Maybe this is in the email I sent to y'all. So I think some members were feeling that the alcohol tax money was not being spent, enough of it on prevention. And so then they spent some money to do a strategic plan. We put it out to bid. Agnew Beck was the bidder. And then they had a community task force and led a group for about a year. There's 3 assembly members working on it. And the community developed the strategic plan. But it's a very long document for assembly members to use. It'd be great if there was a staff person who was in charge of the alcohol tax plan and they could put it on their desk and work their way through it. And so I ended up creating this policy document. It's more kind of an executive summary. I didn't really create any of the text in here. I just pulled the most relevant stuff for the assembly out of the strategic plan and put it into a 4-pager so that when you're giving your budget priorities to the administration, that you don't have to read a 60-page document. You can just flip through this.
Aaron, was that what you needed? All right. So then Daniel and Anna.
I would definitely recommend taking a look at the longer document. Just because I found it really helpful when in the last budget cycle when we were looking, there was an amendment I wanted to bring forward. And so in here, in the executive summary, there's the different buckets, but the longer plan calls out like really specific goals, implementations, examples of what could fall into these different buckets. And I think that helped me think a little bit more expansively about the alcohol tax and what connections we could make to tie it to the voter approved purpose of the alcohol tax. So a lot of creative ideas in there. Yep.
Yes, I apologize for underselling the plan. It's actually an awesome plan. It was just long. Anyhow, it kind of has a menu. If there's an area that you want to work on, you can kind of look up that area and then see some better researched community input ideas of how to accomplish that.
Yeah, and then just to call back to our prior conversation about process and kind of bringing folks along too. So as this was being developed, there was a community process. And I don't remember all exactly the sequencing, but we had a work session on it, maybe 2 work sessions with all members. We brought it to the rules committee meeting a couple times as well, made some space for it like we did today, but in a more working environment. And so it also moved through that process. And I think that's where this kind of shorter document came from, to say, how do we make this a usable piece? So that's an example of where you can have a working group doing something. They use the structures we have to bring it back on a regular basis. And then ultimately it's something we all vote to approve. And so that's a way to do a plan like that.
Other questions? So that was the last item I had. Is there any last words for folks before the weekend begins? So, yeah, so then Tuesday at 5 PM, we convene first regular assembly meeting with the new assembly body formally, first full meeting, and I look forward to it. Do your homework. Let's be ready to have a conversation. That will be adjourned. Thank you all.